Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another stimulating conversation. Today, you got Diane and me, and we've got some interesting stuff to ponder today.
Well, you say stimulating conversation. I'm like, oh, the pressure's on.
No pressure. No, it can't be not. You're a stimulating human being.
No, it's true. And I guess it's just that word stimulating. I mean, it's
well, that's kind of what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. So how do you want to introduce what we're talking about today?
So what we want to talk about today is kind of the interplay between self-awareness and self-management and self-regulation. These are all self words that come up a lot for us as parents around our own stuff, for our kids around their self-regulation, their response to stimulation, right? And we're constantly focused on helping our kids regulate their attention and regulate their emotions. And they get described as having a self-regulation challenge or disorder or whatever. And we want to kind of flip it and say, well, what does it look like? And what about us?
Well, yeah, I like the what about us. It's really interesting because we just wrapped up the 4-week group on elementary age parents. And one of the modules is around trigger management and self-management and this sort of thing. And it's like so many of these parents are like, I got to help my kid because they're losing their cool and they're yelling at me and they're doing all this sorts of stuff. And I'm like, okay, so let's look at that and let's look at what's going on for you in this, right? It's just sort of how, and even if you're not the one that's the primary person that's getting triggered, and let me just say as a caveat, when we say triggered, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're yelling. It just means that you're thrown off balance. You're like agitated, irritated. You may be in fight or flight. I don't know which one you're in. It depends on you as a human, but you're dysregulated. Let's use that word. Is that a fair word that everybody uses?
I think that's a good word.
And I was just talking to someone and it's like, if you're getting dysregulated by your kid being dysregulated, your ability to help your kid get regulated is going to be
diminish significantly, right?
Diminished, right? It's a sort of, he can't believe he called me that, or I can't believe I'm so upset because he's saying how much he hates himself, or whatever it is. If it's dysregulating you, you want to help your kid, and you can't do that the same way.
If it's dysregulating you, then the attention's not on your kid anymore. The attention's on you, right? And I have this memory of this one very unpleasant scene in a family home that may have been mine many years back. When it had to do with unloading the dishwasher, and my kid was just melting. It was trying to get the dishwasher unloaded in order to get out the door, and we needed it done before we went out the door, or we had decided it needed to be done before we left, right? Did it really need to be done? Probably not, but that was the instruction. And because it wasn't being followed, my spouse got totally freaked out about it, and my kids got reactive to that. And I'm trying to calm everybody down because we just needed to leave the house. But now there's this other issue of, do we follow the dad's direction or not? Because we really need to get out to go to soccer practice or softball practice or whatever. And so we end up in this hot mess, right? And the hot mess was because it was no longer about emptying the dishwasher or getting out the door or about what was best for the kid. It became about, well, they're being disrespectful to me as an adult.
Well, it's really interesting because I was, one of my private clients sent me a copy of a text string between her and her kiddo. And one of the things that went back and forth was, this is unacceptable.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, that's how triggered is that response? I mean, so noticing, and this is where the self-management comes in. It's just sort of in self-awareness.
I was going to say before the self-management, this is where the self-awareness
right?
comes
it's just
in.
sort of watching your language, and you may not. So let's give everybody a break here and say you may not be able to get it in the moment, but you might be able to, like, afterwards, after, like, the place to start is often in the rear view mirror of some conversation that you had that didn't quite go the way that you wish that it would, to go,
Yes.
okay, so what was going on here? How unraveled was I? How unraveled were they? Where was my moment for catching myself when I started to go south, or whatever we want to call it, dysregulated?
Yeah.
And what are the things, and we talk about this, it's like, what is the trigger? What is the place that dysregulation started?
Well, so here's what's coming up as you're saying that, right? So we teach the anatomy of a trigger. We teach a whole bunch of stuff around trigger. We have hour-long and 4-hour-long workshops on trigger management, right? And one of the concepts, I was just going through this with a member of one of our coaching groups last week. One of the concepts we talk about is, to keep it really simple, is aware, alert, alarm. Right? Mm-hmm. And most of us are going through our days, if all is well, in a kind of a general awareness of what's going on. And when something happens that gets our spidey senses up, we move into some level of alert. And if we can recognize that we're on alert, that we're starting to get triggered by something, we're worried about something, our sensory system is starting to get off kilter. If we can recognize it, we can put strategies in place to calm ourselves down. So that's where awareness comes in. If we become aware of the fact that we've gone from a base level of awareness to alert, if we're now on alert, what do I do to recognize that I'm on alert and calm myself down before it blows? If I'm in alert for too long and I don't recognize that I'm in alert, I'm going to end up in alarm, because I'm not going to have any capacity anymore to calm myself down. At some point, I'm going to blow, whether it's me or a kid. Right?
Well, and part of what's coming up is you're saying that is, why is that important? What's different about alert? Because alert to many of us feels better than aware, because it's like, there's this sense of power and right. And it's just sort of because you're in your emotional part of your brain. And what happens when we go into alert is that the more emotional aspect, it's not necessarily, it's the limbic system gets triggered and activated. Thank you. That's the right word. And so then our limbic system is competing with our other system,
our executive function,
our executive function, or our creativity, or our intellect, or whatever else. And it's just sort of, there's all this emotion that's going on in the midst of trying to solve a problem, or trying to get the dishes loaded, or trying to get the dog walked, or whatever it is that we're trying to do. There's this level of emotion that gets in there, and we begin to get confused, right? It's just sort of, we begin to fall into our old habits and patterns. We get very me focused. Like you were saying, the energy starts going, like some of us, when I know for myself, when I get agitated, it's like, I've got to fix this, and I got to fix this right now. And I'm the only one that can fix this, right? It's this sort of, no one else can do this. I have to do this.
So much fun when she's like that, y'all.
So much for what? I didn't hear what you said.
You're so much fun when you're like that.
Oh yeah.
I got to do it. I got to do it now.
I got to do it. I got to do it now. Right.
I don't get to deal with that much.
Well, and we go into our coping mechanisms. We either go into avoidance, or we go to control, which is mine. Right. But sometimes our kids are avoidance, or we go to distraction, or we go to isolation, or we go to pleasing. I mean, there's all these kind of coping mechanisms we have as humans. Or defense. Right. So it's important to notice and become self-aware when you're in that agitated state, because you're really not operating on this. I don't want to say on all cylinders, but you're really not operating on all cylinders.
Well, you're not operating from the frontal lobe. That's the rational part of your brain, right? You're operating from a different system. So here's what came up as you were describing it. And I don't even remember if on the trigger chart we have these colors, but we probably should. But so you said, what's the difference between aware and alert? Aware is the bottom, is the base level. It's the green. All systems go, right?
It's green, yellow, red on the chart, by the way.
That's what it should be. So when you move into yellow, think about when we've gotten into environmental alerts in the last 20 or so years, where all of a sudden we're paying attention to the air quality. And they're telling us, is it a green day? Is it a yellow day? Or is it a red day? it's very much like that. If once we hit on alert, now if the pollen counts are at high enough, or if the air quality is high enough, now we're in alert, and we have to pay attention to what times of day we go outside, what types of activities we do outside. And then there are red days where we're told, don't go outside today. Don't take the kids outside today. It's the air quality is not good enough. Now, I don't know if the rest of the country is dealing with that, or if that's
Atlanta
just us
deals
here.
with that a lot.
But we deal with that a lot. And it's very, very similar. Like aware is even keel. And then alert is like, I got to start paying attention, and I got to do something differently. I've got to mitigate or modify my behavior to deal with the upset that's happening. Right. And I think that's really what we're saying.
It is. And I want to take us back to the kid lens for a second, because we were talking again about us. But a lot of times our kids are walking around in alert. Constantly
in high alert, alarm.
And they don't look like it, right? Because remember, avoidance, distraction are coping mechanisms. And if your kid is avoiding, if your kid's on games, if your kid's reading a book 24/7, it might be an indication that they're really stressed out and overwhelmed. And they're walking around in that alert place, which makes it easier, because we're thinking, oh, everything's fine.
So they're on the verge. They're on the verge. They're in a constant state of alert. It could go into alarm at any second, and you don't know what happened, and they're already gone. And you're like, but all I said was put on your shoes.
Right. And then all of a sudden it's World War III, right? So, I mean, I think that's the important piece of it, is to acknowledge that there's these three levels, and to know that you may not know for yourself even, and definitely for your kid, where they are at any given moment.
But right? You can begin to pay attention to where you are at any given moment, right? That's where self-awareness is the precursor to start paying attention to what it takes for you to self-manage yourself and to manage your own regulation. That's, goes back to, you can't control what happens. You can only control how you respond.
Well, and that's like what I wanted to say is, sorry, we got to be the grownups, guys. I mean, I think this is, I was talking to a mom just moments ago, and we're like, if you're in an argument or about to get into an argument, whichever person is aware enough to go, oh, wait, we're in an argument, this is not going to work.
We slow this down. Yeah.
Whoever it is, even if it's you, every single freaking time that you're the one that has to say it because you are the one that's more self-aware, I'm sorry, you get to say it, because you really, I mean, it's going to be to the better good. It may not feel that way in the moment because you want to fight for what you believe in, and like you're agitated and want to control or whatever it is. But the greater good, I think almost any time, unless you're being chased by a mountain lion, the greater good happens in aware.
Yeah, well, and the other thing that came up from what you just said is that dance between influence and control. And we often feel like if we want to control something, we get kind of white-knuckled about it, right? We tight-fisted, we hold on to something. It's got to be a certain way. And actually, the more tightly we try to control something, the less likely it is to go the way we want it to go, because we're not allowing anybody else to have a role in it. When we release some of that control and we start paying attention to how do we influence the situation, how can we guide the situation, then we have a better opportunity not only to manage ourselves, but to help our kids learn to manage themselves and to self-regulate. And a lot of that, it goes back to that. It starts with self-awareness.
Well, it starts with self-awareness, and it's a sort of, again, you're fighting biology, because when you're in that middle range of alert, you don't care about influencing. You want to control. I mean, literally, your brain wants to take over and be in charge.
Well, and it's interesting because you're more inclined towards control, right? And I'm actually more inclined towards, I don't want to say surrender, but I remember particularly when my kids were younger, I was really quick to give it up. Oh, forget it. I'll just take care of it, or I'll do it, or it just won't happen. So I would be more likely to surrender, because that was easier for me than staying in there and having the difficult conversations, or allowing people, or coming back to the conversation after people had gotten upset. I was really good at stopping the conversation and saying, we're all upset, let's not have this now. But I was avoiding coming back to it. I just noticed with one of my kids a couple of weeks ago, there was a conversation I knew we had to have, and I've been avoiding it for a while. And it wasn't a big deal, but logistics are hard for us. And so I was on my way out to dinner to meet a colleague who was in town. And I literally called them on the way out to say, we really need to talk about this. I know it's pain. I'm going to call you. If you're available, I'm going to call you on the way back from dinner. And so I scheduled the time. So I dealt with my own avoidance that way, because I recognized, I was aware that I was the one that was causing the problem by avoiding the issue because I didn't want to deal with the logistics of it.
Well, and what you're alluding to, and we talk about the difference between ending an argument and resolving a conflict.
Yes.
Right? It's this sort of, because a lot of times, everybody gets dysregulated and we'll stop and we'll go to our corners and everybody will calm down. But it's hard to go back and finish the conversation because we don't have strong conflict management skills. I mean, there's a whole...
Or in this case, it wasn't even a conflict.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to deal with it. It was just like making plane reservations is really stressful for me. Right. Calendar stuff is stressful for me. And it was stressful for my kid. And when there was another kid involved, and it was like, nobody was upset. Nobody was angry. Nobody was mad. It was the executive function avoidance of it all. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And I had to recognize that I was doing it in order to manage myself differently to handle it. But I couldn't have done that till I recognized.
So what are the things we do to begin to become more aware of our tendencies, whether it's avoidance or control or distraction or whatever it is?
It's a great question. It's maybe another episode. And we might have some time to answer that one. I think what's coming up to me at the moment is that we ask ourselves, what's the story we're telling ourselves? Mm-hmm. And then we get curious about what's underneath it. Like, what am I really avoiding? What am I really trying to control? If we get curious with ourselves, we always talk about getting curious with our family members, but we can get curious with ourselves too.
Well, and what's coming up for me is two things. One I said earlier, which is really reflecting afterwards, right? It's sort of really taking a minute to go, okay, wait, what happened? What did I know? What can I remember from what happened to me this afternoon or happened in the dynamic this afternoon? And the other thing is to begin to pay attention to our bodies. And, this is a biological response, right? So you're literally shifting to a different part of your brain, which means for most of us that we start breathing differently. Maybe we get tense. Maybe we start running our fingers through our hair.
I call it looking for your tells.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
So
if you were playing poker, you'd have a tell. What are your tells?
Begin to notice what your body does when you get in that state, so that it's a clue that it's like, oh, wait, I just sat up in my chair. You didn't see that, Elaine. And it's like, I just sat up in my chair, right? It's just sort of, okay, I just sat up in my chair. Am I bracing myself for something? Or is that just me feeling like I'm sliding down at the end of the day? So
looking for your tells, doing some debrief with yourself, getting curious, the magic 3 questions, what worked, what didn't work. So instead of beating yourself up about that conversation that did or didn't happen, or that you didn't like the way it happened, well, what part did work? What didn't? Maybe what worked is at least I tried to have the conversation, right? What didn't? What do you want to do differently? So debriefing. Those are good techniques.
It is. And then the other one, we teach this so often, is commit to calm.
Yeah.
Right? It's that commitment. It's that fierce commitment that things will go better for so many reasons that we mentioned in the last half an hour. Things will go better if you can stay regulated, if you can focus on helping your kids stay regulated instead of ending up in the hot mess. And it's that fierce commitment to either recovering well if you do end up in the hot mess, because we all end up in the hot mess sometimes.
Yeah.
Or it's about figuring out how to back out as you notice you're approaching the hot mess. But it's that fierce commitment to calm that I think is an important piece that starts the ball moving in a direction that helps you with self-awareness, self-management, and self-regulation.
Beautiful. Awesome. That was a cool conversation. Did it qualify as stimulating?
Yeah.
Excellent. I knew it would. Always does. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing what you're doing for yourself and for your kids. You know what a huge difference it makes. And we'll see you in the next conversation.
Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/sanityschool.